Hey everyone, Tin Man here, and Dota Underlords has just released another small balance update, as well as a little bit of kind of roadmap information of what we can expect in the coming few weeks here. They do say that the beta season is nearing its end, and Underlord Season 1 will ship by the end of February. Now, I know this is going to be a little bit later than I think most people, including myself, really thought. I was really personally hoping that the beta season would be out or be gone, and Season 1 would start by the end of January. I'm hopeful that it says by the end of February. Hopefully it comes a little earlier than that rather than later. But honestly, it's really hard predicting these things that far out. So I'm hoping that it's sooner rather than later and it's not on Valve time for end of February. They do give a little bit of hints here about what we're expecting to see. They're just going to be doing some standard bug and balance patches from now till then. They'll probably have one more big update before that big ship date, which will include one Underlord. And otherwise, they'll also be working on a new battle pass, the new city crawl mode, which we think is probably some kind of a single-player kind of campaign type of mode, although we're not sure on that yet. A new hero and item rotation, which I'm sure a lot of people are excited about, since that should be coming every couple months, I would hope. And of course, some UI updates. So really looking forward to whenever this next big update comes with the last Underlord should be NO, as well as whatever other changes may be coming in the coming weeks, so that hopefully we can get into Season 1 as soon as possible. Other than that, there are a number of changes here, the kind of small tweaks to the meta. I don't think anything that's really going to upend the entire meta and completely change things, but there's also some good fixes for popular problems. So first up, to prevent misclicks or mistaps, it will block inputs for 1 second when the Underlord Chooser UI appears during the game. And this was a problem that I know I personally have had many times, where I'm just clicking to rearrange my units on the board, and then the Underlord screen pops up. Before it even loads in, I accidentally clicked on an Underlord, and I just got whatever I got. I didn't even get to see my options. And so adding this delay, very welcome improvement in that regards, so you don't accidentally click your Underlord. Fix an issue where freestyle item list where the sign is highlighted. Okay, that's nothing much. Giving enthralled units better health bars. Still not that great, or not that big of a change really. Just kind of a visual thing. And fix an issue where ranked mode would stay locked if returned to the menu. I had not actually noticed that was a thing. Anyway, so really just that one big thing here in the general tab to prevent the misclicks. I know that's a popular problem. Alright, Underlord changes onto the actual balance changes of the game. An Essex damage support. At the end of medicine, the self-cast damage has been removed from end of medicine. Normally she would deal 20% of her max health to herself, and now she's not going to deal any damage. It was kind of, I'll say a little bit outdated that she would hurt herself doing these abilities, and it just made her feel really bad, in particular when she's she's being attacked by somebody, and then she casts her spell and goes from 21% down to 1% and then just gets knocked out. Didn't really feel she's not really looking out for her own best interest in that sense. So I'm glad to see that's been completely removed on damage in Essex, and on healing in Essex, it's been reduced down to just 5%. So a pretty minor kind of probably just for flavor, really, that it's sacrificing our life total to help her team, and 5% is easily going to be healed back up by the rejuvenating ritual itself. Enthrall armor reduction has been increased from 5 armor to 10 armor, and when an Essex casts Enthrall on the targeted enemy unit, friendly units will attack it, but only if the friendly unit is within 2 cells of the new target. They're not going to run from the far corners of the board all in to pile onto this Enthrall target, possibly causing pathing issues, or just not attacking whoever they're about to kill off, and just kind of funneling your entire team. It's just going to be a local area of kind of an AoE taunt. So I think that's actually an improvement. It prevents your entire team from just stopping DPS on everybody, but it should still be enough to get that enthralled target down with an extra armor reduction on it. So I think this is a big buff to damage support in Essex, certainly. And over here on healing support, definitely a buff in this regard that she takes less damage. The Golem will now stun enemies after a short delay, a 0.25 second delay after it lands, and this will prevent the one Golem from disrupting an opponent's Golem. And if you've watched my streams and videos, I definitely complain a lot whenever I have a healing support in Essex, and so does my opponent, and their Golem casts first for whatever reason, and it stuns my in Essex, and then she dies, and she never casts her Golem, but I'm they should cast at the same time, and they just didn't. They cast 1 frame sooner, or one, I don't know if it's a processing power thing, if they're calculating 1 unit at a time, and just happened to be that their NSX processed the 1 tick beforehand. But in any case, the golems, assuming an Essex are not CC'd, both golems should now cast at essentially the same time, and they won't get stunned and prevented. So that's a very nice change. That was honestly like my biggest complaint with Underlords in the past patch. So I'm really glad that got fixed. In the meantime, though, the golem had kind of an issue where its scaling, attack damage scaling, was a little bit weird. The way their system worked from the Gel update to now. Essentially, what I gather out of this bunch of numbers here is this 125 to 145 was never really true. That never really happened. Basically, the golem was just stuck at this 250 to 290 damage range, and now instead it's going to be scaling from 210 all the way up to 295 as a minimum and 230 to 330 as a maximum over the course of the game. So this will be an initial nerf to the golem. He'll do a little bit less damage in the early game, but by the end of the game he'll actually deal a little bit more, and you kind of reach the equilibrium to where he currently is. About halfway through the game, whenever your Underlord is at this like kind of 5th power up. Now, I'm not entirely sure exactly what round that occurs on, but these power ups happen every couple of rounds for your Underlord, just so they can kind of keep pace with the health total and strength of other units in the game. So at some point, this will be a nerf to it early and a buff to it a little bit later. Well, on the whole, though, I feel like this is a net positive for the healing support in Essex to get a little bit later, and she doesn't die quite as easily from her own ability. Even if it takes a little bit of damage hit in the early game, it's still very powerful in the early game. It's not a huge nerf in terms of damage output. Support damage dealer Hobgen, he was honestly my favorite and probably the best Underlord in the previous patch. His attack speed bonus got nerfed ever so slightly early on. Went from 20, 30, 40, 50 to 15, 25, 35, 45. Or even 60 down to 55, and then after that, in the later stages of the game, it's still 70, 80, 90. So by the mostly towards the later end of the game, support Hobgen is still just as strong, but once again, it's a little bit of an early game nerf, similar to what we see with the healing support in Essex Golem, and by the late game, it reaches the same very strong state that it was in. Gel aggressive tank, his barrels of fun, now ignore spiderlings. I honestly didn't realize that it hit the spiderlings. That's obviously a really big issue. If there's a lot of spiderlings around, those are not the ones you want to be hitting with your barrels of fun ability. Personally, I haven't been playing too much Joel, honestly. I've just been sticking with Hobgen and Essex, and I honestly hope Joel would get a little bit of a buff in this patch, but he didn't really get anything here, so I guess the devs think he actually is balanced overall, but I'm still going to lean towards support Hobgen, healing in Essex, and maybe even damage in Essex now with some of these changes. And a little bit less on Gel. Actual hero changes. So Clockwork has been nerfed at 3-star. The delay between damage procs has been equalized to 0.7 seconds. Now, when Clockwork used to be a 3-cost unit, they did an entire pass on 3-cost units where they buffed them all at 3-star. And one of the ways they buffed Clockwork at 3-star was to make his battery assault tick twice as fast at 3-star, and that made him, that was trying to give an encouragement to try to get units up to 3-star in the late game rather than just leveling up and getting ace units or 2 stars of 4-cost units. But now that Clockwork has been moved down to 2-cost, he's a little bit easier to get 2-star, and also Scrappies are just very strong in the meta, so they decided to nerf him at 3-star while keeping him untouched at 1 and 2-star. So I think that's a fair nerf. I don't think you really change your priority on Clockwork. Maybe you don't really want to get him to 3-star now. He's just kind of a good 2-star unit, but he's still very strong at that. And it definitely, you still want to play him in a lot of scrappy builds. And, I would not move him any lower in my priority list because of this. Ember Spirit, arguably one of, if not the best unit in the game previously. His bonus damage has been reduced at 2 and 3-star from 1 to 300 to 100, 150, and 200. This will hopefully tone down Assassins a little bit. Ember Spirit 2-star was just such a beating, dealing 200 bonus damage on every Sleight of Fist attack, and just really being a hugely powerful unit. Like I said, one of probably the top 3 or top 5 units in the game previously, so a welcome nerf, I'll say, to kind of bring him a little bit more in line with some of the other units in the game. Kunkka, on the other hand, probably one of the bottom 3 or bottom 5 units, certainly due to just his weak across the board, low HP, low attack, low impact on his ability. They've buffed up his health just a little bit, and they also increased his attack damage rather substantially from between 75 and 90 all the way up to 90 to 100. So what does this average out to? Like 82.5 all the way up to 100. So that's really substantial buff. He's going to be hitting quite a bit harder at 1 star, and then of course at 2 star it used to be 165 up to 200. So he's going to be hitting quite a bit harder, and I think I would move him up a little bit in priority. He's probably not going to do as much damage as somebody like Slardar or Juggernaut still, but you know, the fact that you can do this kind of a big attack damage buff and he's still kind of medium, I think speaks to how bad of a state he was in before. So a welcome buff, but I don't think it's enough to really catapult him to the top of the priority list by any means. Sniper will no longer target Underlords. Wow. That is a great change. Absolutely great. The worst feeling in the world was, okay, my Underlord's going along, it's about to cast its ult, and it gets targeted by Sniper and it's dead. 1 shot. No defense against that. And you're like, but how are you supposed to deal with that? And, just throw your hands up in the air and just be like, all right, I guess I lose this fight because Sniper decided to ult my Underlord. I hope that he'll still target it if, there's no other target on the board. I'm presuming that'll still happen, but just won't target Underlords initially. And that should hopefully make a bit more, I'll say, fair game, a little bit less kind of coin flippy. Oh, I just happened to randomly hit your Underlord, I guess I win. Or I hit somebody else who's less relevant, and I happen to lose. Great change there, and honestly kind of is a nerf to Sniper, who was one of the better units in the game right now, just because of that super high impact ability. If it hit an Underlord, it was just so incredibly impactful. CC effects are still very good against Underlords, but Sniper Assassinate is no longer kind of your go-to option for that. Viper, another great unit, was slightly nerfed. His maximum mana got increased, so now he won't be casting quite as quickly or quite as on cooldown, which has actually been increased. His maximum mana went from 50 to 70, and the cooldown has gone up from 5 to 6 seconds. So just a little bit longer in between his casts, which are still very potent. They still hit very hard. He'll just cast them a little bit later, and a little bit longer delay. Not huge. I don't say this kills the unit by any means. It kind of brings him in line from like an S tier unit. Maybe he's just A tier now. Still a good unit, but kind of not quite as dominant. I still really like Viper if you get him up to 3 star. He's very tanky, has lots of magic resistance, that corrosive skin, plus the built-in magic resistance. So when you get the dragon bonus, a 3-star Viper can still easily carry your game despite these small nerfs. Balance changes on items. The Battle Fury item, which was honestly one of the worst items, it was fairly lackluster. Its cleave and damage output was not that great, has been buffed, but with a caveat, it is fixed in interaction with Ember Spirit's ability with Sleight of Fist, where Battle Fury could cleave additional times whenever he was doing Sleight of Fist. And this would lead to like some really weird interactions if your opponent's all stacked up, and Ember Fury and Ember Spirits with Battle Fury, and Ember Fury, I guess, would just like melt the team. Everyone would be hit, and then every hit would cleave to every adjacent enemy, and it just would annihilate them. It would evaporate them so fast. And this should really tone that down, only hitting 2 targets when he's at Sleight of Fisting instead of all 4 adjacent. But it does get a little bit of buff. And of course, with Ember Spirit getting a little bit nerfed up above, I think this should still be a good pairing with Battle Fury and Ember Spirit. Should still be a good pairing between the two, but maybe not like the end-all be-all of, this item is completely worthless unless it's on an Ember Spirit. Scythe of Eyes, fiction issue where it could waste a charge on an unpickable enemy. Honestly didn't know that was a thing. I guess if it was hitting like a BKB enemy or something like that, but honestly I never play Scythe of Eyes too terribly much to notice that. Still don't think it's a great item. It's acceptable in some cases, but it's not great. Vesture of the Tyrant, duration of the Undying effect has been increased from 4 to 6 seconds. Now I've only gotten to play Vesture of the Tyrant, or Helm of the Undying, if you want to call it that now, once in this patch, once maybe twice, I don't know. It hasn't been much. And I was kind of unimpressed because I put it on a unit who was like, I thought was roughly in the middle of my formation, and then everyone just kind of runs their separate ways and no one's adjacent to it anymore, and it really didn't have too much of an effect. So I don't really like the item. I think there's better tier 5 items. If you have to pick it up, maybe if you're up against assassins who are all going to jump in on you and everyone's going to be clustered in one area, maybe it's acceptable there against assassins, but otherwise I still am going to tend to avoid that item. And finally, some alliance changes. Assassins have been slightly nerfed at 6 assassins. That's good because I think they were a dominant force in the meta. If you watched my last video, you saw that 3 of the top 4 players in my most recent Lord game were all running 6 assassins. So toning them down a little bit is definitely welcome. It's only a nerf from 400% bonus damage to 375, so the crits are still going to hit really hard, but maybe just bring them down a touch in power level. On the flip side, Hunters, probably the least represented 6-unit alliance, other than probably humans, has been substantially buffed here. Now, the bonus attack chance has been changed from 20 to 40 to 20 or 25 to 40 down over to 25 and 35%. So if you have 6 Hunters, you have 35% chance of triggering 3 bonus attacks rather than just 2. And so beforehand, it was essentially a 25% bonus and then a 40% bonus to your attack damage when you had 3 or 6 Hunters respectively. Now it'll be a 25% bonus, still same as before, but whenever you get up to 6 Hunters, instead of a 40% increase in your damage output, it's now a 70% damage increase because you take this 35% chance times essentially doing 3 attacks. So 3, or rather 200% more times the 35, that's 70% bonus damage. So that is a really substantial buff going from 40 up to 70% bonus increase. So I would definitely look to see more 6 Hunter compositions coming up here in this particular patch. I know I'm going to be trying some 6 Hunters. I think they might be much better, especially if you get Medusa, the Ace of Hunters. They can absolutely shred people now with this change. It's a pretty dramatic increase. Scrappy has been slapped on the wrist again. Scrappy is one of the best compositions in the meta. The bonus armor has been changed from 8/16 down to 7/14. Another just 1 armor nerf. Remember, a patch ago it was 9 and 18, and now it's down to 7 and 14. Health regen is still unchanged. I still think Scrappies are going to be very powerful. You know, maybe not quite as dominant, but I think the biggest problem with Scrappy, or rather the biggest appeal of Scrappy to most players in the meta, is that it's so easily accessible early on. If you can get Clockwork, Bounty Hunter, Timbersaw, Weaver, and arguably like Snapfire as like a Scrappy unit on the first turn, the first 3 rounds, and you can get those up to 2-star very quickly, and you already have a couple of them, they make quick synergies, and they're powerful early on. And so no one wants to move away from that. You're just like, well, I already have all these Scrappies, why would I switch? As long as they're still reasonable in the mid and late game, which they are. And this nerf doesn't do anything about that. Maybe it just makes them a touch weaker. So I still think they're going to be quite popular, but they're going to be lower in power. And I think if people can pick up something like a Hunter build that can really exploit that slightly less armor later on, you'll start to see a bit more success, especially if it's uncontested and you can get a really good Hunter build together. Warriors have also been ever so slightly buffed at 6 Warriors. We're kind of like inching right back to where they were when it was a 10 and 20. When Warriors used to be 10 bonus armor and 20 bonus armor. Now it went from 9/18 to 9/19. Just give them one more to get some nice round numbers. That being said, Warriors' biggest problem is still they kind of lack really impactful units, although I have had some success running 3 Warriors at different points in the game, with like Slarter, Tusk, Tiny, Juggernaut in particular, are very strong in the early and mid game. So I'm not completely rolling out Warriors. You know, at some point they're going to get buffed back to a point where they are that strong. I'm just not sure if they're quite there yet, but I would still play 3 Warriors from time to time. So that's it for these balance changes. Kind of some light touches on the meta, nothing that's super dramatic. One thing I do think is missing is some buffs to Jull. I still think he's a weak Underlord. I wanted to see some buffs to Knights. I don't really see any changes to Knights here, and I think Knights are still going to be an underperforming alliance. And also didn't see any nerfs to things like Treant or Brutes, who I kind of thought were very powerful, or Warlocks rather than Brutes, but Treant in particular as an egregious like best unit in the game. So no nerfs on that. Hopefully we'll see those at some point. So still going to be sticking with those. They're still great units. But the meta in general is still roughly the same, with just a little bit of tweaks. I'm really excited to try out 6 Hunters though. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you next time.